had Muktananda or
No,
Ananda Maima or
no,
because
no. I had gone up to the Himalayas to try to find some Tibetan teachers since it had been a Tibetan text,
right,
but it was in the middle of winter and it was freezing cold and the Tibetans had all gone south,
right,
so
right.
nobody was there.
No,
Uh, no, and so Munindra was really, aside from that one ashram I had gone to, he was the first teacher I met. I feel very fortunate because it was just exactly what I was looking for.
right. But you did do some practice in another tradition of Vipassana. You sat Goenka retreat
That was
as
after.
well. Okay. You get to Bodh you meet Manindra. How long did you stay in
The,
India at this point?
that very first time I was in India, I stayed for about 6 weeks, 2 months, before I got to the States. And when I started, I had no concentration. So it's almost like I was practicing to catch up to the experience I had had,
Right,
because I hadn't done any of the mental development that in the normal course of things would have culminated in that.
right.
And so when I started to actually,
So you were not a prodigy,
not
a
a,
meditational prodigy from the side of actually doing the practice.
not at all.
Yeah.
In fact, I think quite the opposite.
But so what's interesting is that this breakthrough cessation experience, as a starting point, why wouldn't that have made you a prodigy?
The only the only prodigy aspect that I could discern, there was no doubt about the path that had illuminated, because I had this very clear understanding, realization of the selflessness of it all. But I saw also that there was still a lot more work to do. There was still a lot of conditioned habit patterns of mind that were still there. So even though I knew they were selfless, I had that basic understanding. Still,
And when you sat down to meditate with Manindra, you're spending virtually all your time lost.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you don't have concentration.
yeah, no, exactly, and enjoying it. I thought it's a nice way to spend an hour.
Right.
It's-
Cross your legs and think.
Yeah, exactly, which is basically what I did. But I knew I had found the path. The path made sense to me, even though that it was not easy. But I didn't have any doubt. I knew, this is what I want to do. So I went back to the States, worked for a little bit while, made a little more money, and just, was anxious to get back to India to pursue it. When I went back, I got inspired to do the meditation on loving kindness. Metta. That's the Pali word. I had just come to a realization that I felt that this was a quality that I could well develop in myself. I feel a little lacking in myself, and I started lacking in the world. So I was very inspired.
Just describe what that practice is.
Yeah. So the way metta is done, or one way it's done traditionally, is just to think of somebody. You start with a benefactor, somebody for whom you have good feeling, loving feeling, and you visualize them and repeat certain phrases of loving kindness, of well-wishing. May you be happy, may you be peaceful, may you be free of suffering. And it really becomes a mantra of loving kindness, where you're repeating the phrases, directing it to the image. And then it's a progression going from a benefactor to a friend, to somebody who's neutral, to somebody who's difficult for you, and then to all beings. So it's a gradually expanding field of loving kindness.
And unlike mindfulness, in this practice, there's a target mental state
Yes.
you're trying to kindle and to hold
Yes.
in the mind and to grow and deepen. And there's a very explicit goal
Yes.
in terms of the mental state you're trying to.
Yes. And actually there are two aspects to it. One is the development of the feeling of loving kindness, but it is also a concentration technique. And so what develops, it can also be used to develop concentration as well as the feeling of loving kindness. And for me, I was doing this loving kindness meditation intensively, also for about 6 weeks or 2 months. So this is all day, every day. Just
So you're on retreat now.
I'm on retreat,
Okay.
yeah. And it was in doing that practice that for the first time my mind developed some concentration, and it was quite remarkable. I mean, it's a whole new inner space. And before, even though I had no doubt about the practice and I was committed to doing it, it was really difficult. It was work.
So your first time, you had periods that were periods of intensive practice on retreat doing Vipassana, where you hadn't broken through.
No.
So your first period of retreat was doing metta.
No, the first 6 weeks when I first went to Bodh Gaya, I was doing Vipassana. But
for like 10 hours a day, or
yeah,
still just feeling the effects of not having concentration.
Right. No, I was continually trying to bring my mind back because it was hard work. But I had no doubt about it. I wanted to do it.
But you were a hard case, because many people do a 10-day or 3-week retreat Vipassana for the first time, and at some point in that retreat, really do experience kind of effortless concentration.
No, I didn't, and that's why for me now as a teacher, I have tremendous confidence in people being able to do it. Because if I could do it, anybody could do it, because my mind was so unconcentrated. Yeah. But the metta really, that established my mind with a degree of concentration. Not fantastic, but sufficient.
Yeah.
And it changed everything, because once the mind develops a certain level of concentration, then the practice becomes much more effortless.
Right.
There's a momentum to the practice, and it becomes much more enjoyable. And so doing that period of the loving kindness was really important for me in the whole trajectory. Mm. And then at a certain point I went back to Vipassana, and then just proceeded to continue with Vipassana going through.
So how long did you stay in India this time?
I was in India over a 7-year period, and I was back and forth to the States maybe 2 or 3 times in that period for a few months at a time. So I was mostly in India.
Mostly in India for about 7 years.
Mostly
in Bodh Gaya?
Bodh Gaya during the winter months, we would go to the mountains in the summer months.
Dalhousie?
Yeah, Dalhousie is very, very hot in the plains in the summer.
So and during this period, so you're basically in India for 7 years, and then now this is the period where a real influx of Westerners is now noticeable. You've got Ram Dass and the whole party coming through Bodh Gaya and doing Goenka retreats. So you studied with Goenka as well during that period?
I did. It's starting in 1970. I started doing Goenka retreats, which was also very powerful. It was a very powerful technique. But I had a major obstacle. So when I first started doing Goenka, which is a body scanning.
So the difference being you don't focus on the breath as a primary point of contact. You actually very strategically move through the body, noticing sensation from your toes to your head and back again.
Right. He does emphasize using the breath for the first few days of a 10-day retreat. For concentration. Right. And then it opens up to the body scan.
Right.
So when I first started doing that, I already been with Munindra for a few years. My body, it totally opened up. It just became a body of light. It was wonderful. It was just free flow of energy. It was.
Unpack that phrase. Can sound a little spooky. Body of light. What do you mean by body of light?
It's.
You weren't literally glowing.
From the inside, it felt like it. But usually we experience the body as somewhat dense and solid. But through this intensive body scanning up and down, we begin to experience the body as an energy field.
Right.
Meaning just a field of flowing sensations with no solidity anyplace. And so it's just this free flow of energy. It's very enjoyable. And so I got into that, and would just spend hours and hours and hours in that. It's very effortless. Then I had to go back to the States. Maybe I'd run out of money, or went back for a couple of months. When I came back to India, I had lost my body of light. and it would become like a body of twisted steel.
Right.
And I could not recreate that experience. And for 2 years, I was struggling to get that back.
Struggling in the context of
meditation.
With Goenka or with Munindra?
No, with Goenka.
So you spent 2 years doing the Goenka style?
Oh, more. I spent close to 4 years. 3.5 years.
Right.
Doing that style. So it had started off gloriously.
Right.
And then it had crashed.
But of course, mindfulness, the point of the practice is not to recreate any specific body manifestation.
But
it was too seductive.
It was too seductive, and I was just doing it wrong.
Right.
But
and did Goenka give you instruction?
No, not really. It was because there was a lot of emphasis in that tradition to get that free flow. So that was in a way the goal.
Right.
And so it was exceedingly frustrating.
Yeah.
It was the worst 2 years of my practice.
Right.
And it took me 2 years to realize that it's not about getting something back, but to be with how things are. So finally, it took a long, long time. Finally, my mind let go of that fixation and just relaxed into how things were, and then there started to be movement again. It never got back to how it was,
right?
But it didn't matter. There was a different kind of flow. So that was its own learning, in terms of understanding what the practice really is about. What it's not about.
That's a point of interest to me, which we've argued about in other contexts. But it's interesting the way in which the logic of a practice, explicit or implicit, can lead you to practice in a way that is just not profitable.
There's a very classic progression in what are called the stages of insight. So there's a very classic unfolding of different experiences where people at a certain stage have experiences of tremendous rapture and clarity and concentration and all the things that we're practicing to develop. At this particular stage, they're called corruptions of insight, because the tendency is for almost everybody in one way or another to get attached to them. It's such a remarkable shift from anything that's happened before that when you're experiencing that, it just feels you've arrived.
Yeah, this is the flavor of enlightenment.
Yeah.
It seems like
Yeah.
this is why I was practicing in the first place. I want to feel this way.
Exactly, and it's called pseudo nirvana.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it takes some real guidance at that point to simply be mindful of those states as other changing conditions, not to be attached to it. And the very next stage of insight is called seeing what is the path and what is not the path. And that's an important juncture, because until that point, we think that having those experiences is the path.
Yeah.
And so we have to really go through that and see that it's not the path, that's just experiences along the way, and that the whole path is always about letting go. It's not about holding on.
Yeah. And whatever is fundamental to the nature of mind has to be discoverable in the context of whatever experience happens to be present. If the thing you're taking to be significant is there by virtue of having some contingent conditions in place, then obviously it's vulnerable to, to change.
Exactly. I like to say in teaching, in guiding people through situations like this, if freedom is dependent on conditions, it's not freedom.
Just take me back to that period, so that now you're a Buddha guy, you've been there for years. Now you're just practicing in a Buddhist context. You're not going to meet Neem Karoli Baba or Anandamayi Maharaj. Now it's the whole spiritual circus is happening around you. Everything that you can read about in Ram Dass's books.
I had no interest. I was so in alignment with this path. It was so exactly, felt so right for me. I really had no interest in doing anything else except deepening my experience around it. over the years, there is an unfolding path experience. Go through all kinds of different experiences, all of which are to be let go of. But it was completely fascinating. It was like this journey into the mind, the exploration of the mind, the very real feeling that as vast as things are looking out into space, that same vastness is when you look in the inner space. And so it was tremendously compelling.
Had you had that cessation experience again through the practice of Vipassana under Munindra Goenka in those years in
No.
India? So 7 years in India practicing Vipassana, you still hadn't gotten back to that same experience?
No. No, it got back to the quality of mind, the openness of mind. That was the fruit of that experience.
Right.
But not that.
Not the precipitating cessation
Yeah.
experience. So then when did that come? When did you...
So then in 84, met our Burmese teacher, Sayadaw Pandita. And he's a very demanding teacher, very strict. So there was a whole movement of, again, doing intensive practice, but tremendous intensity.
Yeah, really bearing down on
Yeah.
it.
And so it was in practicing him.
In that first 84 course, or?
Not in the 84 course, but then in 85 went to Burma and sat there when I was practicing with Deepama. There were some experiences, not with the same impact, but which she thought were of that depth. And that's when I realized, that's when I came to who knows, because it didn't seem to me to be that.
Right.
But here's this great teacher saying so.
Yeah.
And so in the course of my history, I've had experiences where I thought something significant had happened and the teachers didn't, where I thought it wasn't so significant and the teachers did.
Yeah.
And so
Well, clearly, I would imagine you come down on the side of your perceived significance has to trump their outside view of your mental development.
Well, in both cases, no, because there are so many different kinds of spiritual experiences.
But presumably, if you have one that has a profound effect on you going forward,
Right.
it's the measure of its significance is its profound effect.
It's lasting profound effect.
Yeah.
But sometimes in the moment you can think something is very profound, and I've had this.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that the maps are always super clear.
Right.
The unfolding experience for different individuals sometimes is, but sometimes isn't. I've come to a sense of just staying open to the different possibilities of what something means without rushing to conclusions.
Isn't that also synonymous with being open to the possibility that the maps are not accurate?
Either not accurate or not complete.
Yeah.
Every map of necessity is limited. It's a map, it's concepts.
Yeah.
Trying to describe experience, and experience is always more varied than the map and conditioned by so many different things. I guess my mind has just become much more relaxed with regard to conclusions.
Yeah.
And the basic framework for me at this point is, with regard to the whole range of spiritual experiences, the measure of its importance is whether the defilements are lessened and perhaps uprooted or not.
We've begun